Good evening, everyone. Hi, my name is Dave Stevens. I'm the site manager here at Mill City Museum, and I just want to welcome you and thank you so much for coming to the event tonight. The Minnesota Historical Society creates opportunities to explore the history of Minnesota, and Mill City Museum does that with a focus on the history of Minneapolis. And we're just grateful for opportunities like this, and sort of humbled to host this event because we're always looking for opportunities to expand the stories that we tell. If you've been here before, you know we're focused on the riverfront history and industry and flour milling, and looking for telling the story of all Minnesotans and all Minneapolitans, and just in general to expand the notion of history, to explore all sorts of different perspectives. That's why we have the exhibit behind us and why we've been happy to partner with Telling Queer History for two events during the run of this exhibit. So again, thanks for coming out. And now I'd like to introduce and hand the microphone over to founder and executive director of Telling Queer History, Rebecca Lawrence.
Hello, everyone. Come close to us, please. We like to be friends. Yes. My name is Rebecca. I also use RJ. And I'm the founder and executive director of Telling Queer History. You already heard that, but I'm saying it again. So Telling Queer History is something we started about 11 years ago, really with the idea of bringing a sense of belonging and connection across our two-spirit LGBTQ community, because even if you look in this room, we come from all the kinds of people that there are in the world. Every race, class, gender, age, generation, experience of life, we are all of those. And yet we have to come together to fight for our rights, to find community, to find love. And there aren't that many spaces, because of the world that tries to divide us, where we can do that. I was working as a volunteer during the marriage amendment in 2012, way back then, and saw the power of storytelling happening. We used storytelling, one person calling one person across the state, told their story of love, and listened to what love and marriage meant to that other person on the phone. And using that story, we were able to move that middle section that wasn't quite sure if we deserved to have marriage. We moved them over. And that changed the course of our history of our state and our country. And it did something that 12 states before us had not. Because arguing for our rights, when people don't want to give us rights, doesn't work very well. Arguing for love and empathy, getting to the heart, is a powerful tool, right? And so I saw that, and I also saw who wasn't included in that campaign, who wasn't going to benefit from marriage, who else needed our community to step up, to invest in the care of each other. And so that's why I created Telling Queer History 11 years ago. And we've been hosting storytelling gatherings like this ever since. We usually have some sort of theme. We have storytellers from your community. These are amazing people. These are your people. Sometimes they're folks who are published authors, known politicians. Sometimes they're just another person I might have met somewhere along the way, or someone introduced me to. And everybody's story is valuable. Your story is valuable. And we need to make sure that we listen to them and that we record them so that we have this history in the future. So that's what Telling Queer History does as its core programming. We have some of those recordings on our website. We also have a digital timeline. You can find it's a global queer history timeline that's been collectively gathered by our community at events like this. And then we have one specific to Minnesota history. So you can use that to learn and teach. What else did I want to say? You can donate and be part of this community as an investor. One-time or monthly donations are really helpful. It helps me literally pay my mortgage so that I can continue to do the things that I love to do, which is build community and share stories. It's not just about me. I have a team. We pay all of our storytellers. We pay interpreters at every event. We always provide food. Our events are always sliding scale, substance-free, and we usually provide childcare at our core events as well. So really thinking about how do we take care of community in as much of a holistic way as possible. So that's what you're investing in when you invest in telling queer history. Okay. A couple more things to get us launched into this space. We want to acknowledge that we are on Dakota land, we are on stolen land, and there is a long history of attempted genocide of Native people. That despite that, Native people are still here. They are still teaching us, and they are still stewards of this earth and all sentient beings, and for that we are grateful. We also acknowledge that this society and economy was built on stolen labor and lives on the backs of people forced into slavery on this stolen land. While we take in the history of that, we can also reflect on our own place in that history on this land and ways that we can repair both. And you can join me in ways, Telling Queer History is working on putting part of our budget towards giving money back to those communities, and there's other ways we can take action, because it's not just about acknowledgement, it's about action. I'm the public crier. Yesterday was my friend Patricia's birthday, and she's an ancestor now. Patricia Van Oort was a part of the Fond du Lac Band of Ojibwe, and she was a board member for us a few years in the early years. And when I went to her homegoing ceremony, they taught us a ceremony, which I'll do after I get us set up. We provide a plate. They taught us to provide a plate of food to bring your ancestors into the room with you. And so they invited us to take that ritual with us. So I like to bring Patricia here. And I also lost another Pat Nelson this year, who was also on our board. Both of these women of color were far too young to be lost in our community, and I valued what they gave and taught me. So I invite them into the room. And I also know we went through and are still going through a massive pandemic where everyone's lives were touched by loss. And this is not the first time our community, especially our queer community, has felt that. So I invite you, either in your hearts or out loud, to say any ancestors that you want to bring into this room to help hold this space with us. Thank you for bringing them with you. Okay, last little bit before we get into it. These are some of the space agreements that we have for telling queer history, and I hope that we can honor them together. So, we ask that folks practice stepping back and stepping up, checking your privilege and giving space for others to speak up and find their voice here. Confidentiality. What is said here is kept in the circle. Retelling stories without details unless you ask for specific permission. You can tell my story. Listen, learn, share, and keep conversations respectful. If you don't understand something, you can ask and be patient. Participate in a way that you are comfortable and able, and take care of yourself. By that we mean get up and get food when you need to. Go to the bathroom, take a break, move your body. Not everybody is comfortable holding still. You don't have to. This is not a classroom, as I said. You get to move your body, you get to have a body. Feel your feet right now if you want to. And then respect how people identify. You might not get it, but they do, and they're honoring you by sharing that with you. So take that with you and try. Okay. How's it feel? Are we? Do you feel ready? Okay. Raymond grew up in a deaf and a hearing family of 9 children in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. He is the author and editor of over 30 books. That's amazing. Including A Quiet Foghorn, More Notes from a Deaf Gay Life, and Men with Their Hands, a deaf gay novel. He has recently edited Oh Yeah, a bear poetry anthology, okay? He has some books for sale I highly recommend. I'm gonna have to get some. And Ray is gonna be sharing a story, and you'll hear a voice from one of our interpreters. All right, settle in.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and start. Hello, everyone. And the reason I'm going to stand is because I don't want people's necks getting all twisted, and I don't want to twist my neck either. So this way, it's just going to be a little bit more comfortable. You guys sit back, relax, watch me tell my story. Okay. Now, I am sitting here. I'm used to teaching, they were talking about being here, history. So I was thinking about, why is history important? So I grew up in a hearing family that did not sign. 9 children. Everybody kind of constantly talking. I couldn't follow. I couldn't lip read. Everybody was moving around. And I'll explain, lip reading's very difficult to begin with. And it definitely depends on context. And so I could catch some things, but I couldn't follow what they were saying. So growing up, I would just look at all these conversations happening in my hearing family, and they would tell stories. I wouldn't understand anything. And I wasn't allowed to sign until I was 14, because that was back then. That's what we did. And so that's a long time to go without communication and information. So I definitely depended on reading. I didn't really care for people. I read. And this is kind of where my perspective is coming from, is from the reading. So now here, Minneapolis, this is where my mind opened. There was 2 parts to my experience in Minneapolis. So coming from Michigan, I come from a very small town. I grew up in a place called Ironwood. It's in the Upper Peninsula. It's kind of all the way far on the west. I don't know if everybody knows where Michigan is, but it's like the furthest west part of Michigan you can get. And their town had less than 5,000 people. A very small town. So, of course, there were very few deaf people. And there was, the other deaf person was oral. They did not sign. And so my father, the brothers and sisters, none of them signed. But there was a role model that was a high school dropout, and he worked as a dishwasher at the Holiday Inn. That was my only role model. So I thought that would be what my future entailed. Of course, growing up, I became older, and I understood that there was much more people like me. There was a much bigger group. But growing up, it was very hard because I couldn't hear the stories. For example, in a lot of ways, being deaf was a blessing, because I did not realize, for example, some people who talk or say things that are offensive, I didn't grow up hearing. I had to lip read. So if you wanted to say something, you literally had to say it to my face, which a lot of people wouldn't do. So I kind of had a little bit of an attitude because I didn't understand some of those things. And so it didn't really affect who I am and who I became. So some of the difference between Ironwood and Minneapolis. So again, Ironwood had less than 5,000 people, but there's a lot of differences between there and Minneapolis other than people. First of all, in Ironwood, everybody knew who you were, who your parents are, who your family is. They knew your name, everything about you. They knew everybody. So I was the only deaf person, so of course, everyone knew me. The first time I came to Minneapolis, it was in 1972. So I came to Minneapolis. It was shocking. There were so many people just bustling around this city, and nobody knew who I was. And I was like, yes! That's what I wanted to be in the big city, where I didn't have the labels. Nobody could look down on me for simply who I was. And it was the first time, okay, so my sister, she's the second oldest sister, worked at NSP. That's the old power company, Northern State Power. It was just down the street here. And so she worked during the day, and so I was just sitting around doing nothing. She said, go explore the city. So of course I walked around, and at that time, maybe like 5 blocks, again, this was way back when. It was before Block E. But when I was here, it was kind of gross, and there was a lot of sex shops and just really interesting things. And I was shocked. I was like, my God, what is this? And so that's what I thought. Like, it was just kind of sleazy. And I didn't think it was proper or appropriate compared to how I grew up. That was my first impression walking around. And I was like, oh, is this my future then? And just kind of going, okay, keep my lips shut, not saying nothing about that. And then I graduated high school and I went to Gallaudet University. This is the first time, this is where I learned ASL, this is where I came out, this is where I became empowered. And the reason for that is because, well, for those of you who don't know, Gallaudet is located in Washington, D.C. And I went to the bookstore called Lambda Wright Bookstore. And it was very different than the bookstores I had seen on the old Hennepin Avenue, which just had basically the sleazy stuff. And this one had literature. And I was shocked. Because then I understood that they had that breadth and range of literature that I now had access to. And it was very respectful literature that they had there. That's where I realized it's okay. And it would be okay for me. As there wasn't anything at that time about being deaf and gay. It was kind of two separate things. But it was very interesting. So the deaf world, 90% of deaf children are born to hearing parents. I don't know if you know that. So now that is strange enough. But so you have the hearing world, and then a smaller world is the gay world. And so I found that to be very similar, how small the gay world was and the deaf world was. And at that time, there was many interpreters who were gay. And same kind of issues were happening between the deaf community and the gay community, where hearing parents didn't want deaf children, straight parents didn't want gay children. And so it was a very interesting time to have those kind of hard conversations. Everybody at that time was hoping for the existential perfect child. And of course, none of us really fit that. I mean, I'm not a perfect kid for sure. And deaf people, especially back then, really loved and cherished their abilities to sign. allowingness to sign and to tell our stories through signing and to act things out. That was a really big reason, that we did it. But understand, at the time, learning ASL in itself was hard. Everybody focused on the lip reading. Everything was focused on the lips, the mouths, the tongues, the sound, versus the visualization to really incorporate that into myself, to really take that on. And I noticed at that time, there was a lot of gay people at the time who were similar by acting as if they're straight to fit into the community, to not be allowed to be themselves and to be supported. It was similar to that. So I found those parallels very interesting. And one thing Rebecca had mentioned, so I was thinking about here. So the second thing, so I have a book, so like Rebecca said, I wrote a book called Widower Looking for a Man. And the reason for this is because I got really interested into the history or gay history in Minneapolis. So I interviewed a lot of different people in their 60s, 70s, 80s. And there's a lot of these stories that you're seeing behind you. And in this area is kind of special. I mean, I understand the work's not done. And so if you look at the second panel here, this is something that I really strongly recommend you guys go look at that panel here when we're done. Because it kind of really tells us where we're from, which can advise on what our future has the possibility of looking like. I don't feel the same family story that my family has. I have no idea. I had limited access to that. I don't have that connection. So I feel that it's very important that we support when we do have those connections. So the first time I bought a book on gay history, I try to figure out, where are my people? Where are my people? And so when I started writing, I realized. And of course, that book that I published is the second iteration. But at that time, they didn't really have anything for me. It's not like now where it's kind of like you can walk into a candy shop and that we have those stories now. It wasn't there. So I went to a store. I had $45 on me. And I spent 3 hours in a bookstore. So recently, trying to decide which one of these wonderful books to buy. And that, I think the book I bought actually only cost like $43 or something. But there was people watching me look. I had a stack of 7 books that I was super interested in looking at. And the guy looked at me and said, you don't have quite enough money. Or, I don't think you have enough money. So I showed him the money that I had, and it did cover it, and it also covered my bus ride. And so that day at Gallaudet, when I had all those books, and I had them in a brown paper bag, I was actually kind of scared, so I was trying to hide the books. It's like, nothing's happening here. These are just regular books. Everything's fine. And then I got back to my dorm room, and my roommate was gone. And I spent the whole day reading all those books well into the night. And so again, this was at Gallaudet University. And so I read all of them almost in the same day. And so that's when I understood the connection between deafness and gay, and having to fight for those, and honestly, to not care what people thought. So I realized that day I did not need to be embarrassed. And it wasn't just the only thing offered to our community was the sleaze that I had been presented as a child. Okay, am I good on time? Yes. Okay, anyway. So an widower looking for a man was inspired. Well, I'm gonna back up and I'm gonna explain a little bit about the writing process of that. So a lot of people write kind of the same thing, and I didn't want to do that because I wanted people to read. I didn't want people to read the same old story. So I decided, what if I wrote something about a man, a widower sharing for a man? It's not about the sex. It's not about being hot or not. It's the husband, the love. So this man's husband, if they died, they were married 30 years. So after 30 years of being with someone, how do you look for love again? So I looked back at the history and the relationships. I think it was like quite a bit of time that I was looking at. And then I was specifically looking at the history here in St. Paul, Minneapolis. And then Bryant, thank you, came and said, well, you can find men here. So it kind of was like in your face, right? So there's a lot more acceptance here. So there's a lot of gay history and gay stories that are here. Now, of course, I know my time's running off, so I think that afterwards we can go ahead and ask questions. I'm open to, I think we got a few minutes. Rebecca's giving me the go-ahead, so if anybody has any questions about my story or anything now, I'm opening it up to you. What are you guys curious about? So does anybody have any quiz questions to ask me? Anyone? You guys can go ahead. The interpreters can interpret it. Go ahead.
How did you decide to return to Minneapolis after DC?
Oh, thank you. Excellent question. So I kind of went a roundabout way. So I graduated in 1988, and then I went to New York. You know, kind of rocked on Broadway, had fun in New York the way every youth should. But I didn't stay in New York because it was just, it didn't fit me as a person. I just felt like New York didn't fit. It was just, there was no way of really getting to know each other. But I did stay there for about 7 years. I had met someone. And then we had what I call a good divorce. It wasn't a contentious, there wasn't any arguing, crying, any of that. It was a good divorce. But I could not find a place cheap enough for me in New York. So a good friend of mine who's here said, hey, why don't you come to Minneapolis? At the time it was super cheap, you can come here. And I moved for that reason and I've stayed ever since. Does that answer your question? Excellent. Is there anybody else who has any questions for me today? Yes, go ahead. Okay, got it. I think I understand what you're saying. So thank you so much for clarifying that for me. One of the problems is that back then it wasn't like there was gay younger people. Everybody was kind of more quiet. There wasn't that engagement. There wasn't that motivation to being out. And that was the problem that I saw. There was a few younger people who were telling their stories back then. Shepard. So Matthew Shepard. I don't know if anybody has heard that name before. If you don't know, you kind of should. But there was just a few other names, but it was shocking that there's so few. And that's kind of a shame. It's very important that they know our history, or that we tell our history and that we learn our history so that we don't make the same mistakes twice. So part of that, like with the younger generation, they're being offered, those stories. It's kind of, here you are, ready to go. But the history is kind of for us was a little bit more muddled. It was a lot of learning through mistakes and being told inaccuracies. And it wasn't until we became older that we were able to find our history. And so like the younger generation now, it's kind of not a big deal. They have that. That's something that they can participate in, but it wasn't until we were older, until I was older. Even it wasn't until after I was out of high school, that I realized I wasn't alone. So it's not the same that experience that the youth has right now. Back then, it was a lack of information. You really had to search for it. We were hungry for that information, and there wasn't anything. The stores didn't sell these books. There wasn't any information out there. And especially for me, I didn't, there was, with signing, you can't watch it on TV. There wasn't any representation in movies. There wasn't anything for us in magazines. This is why I'm really appreciative of Rebecca and these types of projects, because I feel like it is important for us to tell our stories. I mean, we still have a long way to go, which is sad. Okay, I think I've spoken enough. But yes, thank you everybody for being patient with me and hearing my story. Thank you so much.
All right, we're gonna wiggle our bodies and take a deep breath. And help yourself to food and drinks as needed. All right, we're just gonna go in the chair order as we are. Sound okay? Javier is a storyteller, a writer, an activist, a podcaster, and a political commentator, amongst many other things, I think. We're going to hear some more. He is one of the regular hosts of the Twin Cities Moth Story Slam, and his stories, Ricardo and Jail Lessons, were featured in NPR's Moth Radio Hour and the Moth Podcast. He has had 2 successful solo shows and the Fringe Festival, including Broken English Mother Tongue, which was also featured in the juried New York City International Festival in 2018. As a political commentator, he is often seen as a passionate progressive in the Twin Cities Public Television Almanac, Minnesota Public Radio, and other media. He created and co-hosts the podcast Wrong About Everything, a fun, irreverent, and bipartisan look at Minnesota and international politics, currently on a hiatus. Where's my other page? There it is. It's very humid. My page is stuck together. Okay, here we go. Thank you. In June of 2019, he stepped down as president of SEIU Local 26, a union of 8,000 janitors, security officers, and other service workers, a position he held for 14 years. He currently works as a senior state strategy director for Movement Voter Project, an organization that raises resources for progressive donors and invests them in state-based grassroots organizations. He lives on the west side of St. Paul with his husband, John Stiles, and their puppy, Chulo. Chulos. Chulo. There you go. That's your intro.
Yeah.
Take it away. Yeah, you can have the spotlight.
Sorry, I'm not trying to be at anyone's back. All right. Hey, everyone. So my story begins in November of 2005. I was still pretty new to the world of texting, and I got a message from my sister in Puerto Rico, and it said, Mom knows you're gay, and she's okay with it. I was like, could you say more? And it turned out that my mother and my sister had had a conversation that my mother and I had been avoided having for years. Because in 2005, kids these days, they come out very young, and I'm very happy for them. But that was not my experience. And in 2005, I was a grown-ass man who had for years perfected with my mother our very own don't ask, don't tell policy, like way before Bill Clinton. And the rules of our don't ask, don't tell policy were basically that I know you know I know, but if you tell me, then when your tias ask me, why hasn't Javi gotten married? And I answer, well, you know, Javi, he studies so much, he doesn't have time for girls, then I'll be lying. And it wasn't entirely a lie. I didn't have time for girls. But I was, for a very long time, okay with this. I think, coming to the States in the 80s for college and living here in a time when gay identity was really defined by like sort of urban white gay male identity, and there was a real importance placed on the coming out, the act of coming out, very importantly, right? But there was a sense that you had to be out all day long to everyone who knew you or saw you, like at Starbucks, the barista, I'm gay, and it felt very, to me, a very American thing, and that I did not identify with. And I sort of thought of it as, I'm not in Puerto Rico, my parents, I wasn't having those conversations with my tias, so I was fine with it. And it had worked for a long time. And, my parents had met my partner, now my husband, John, in 2000, he came to Puerto Rico, and he met everyone, met the tias, and everyone met him as Javi's friend. Javi's best friend. And when I moved to Minnesota, and John a year later followed, as best friends do. But gradually, as we made a life together here in Minnesota, it was harder and harder because there was less and less that I could share with my mother. And my mother and I were very, very close. And so I was incredibly excited when my sister Tina told me that she and Mommy had this conversation. I was like, oh wow, we're gonna do it. And as it happened, I was planning on being in Puerto Rico for that Christmas. My brothers were also coming. For the first time, the kids, we were all gonna be together under my parents' roof since we lived as children. But as soon as I got to Puerto Rico, I noticed immediately that Mommy was avoiding being alone with me. She was just never alone in a room with me, and that was very noticeable to me because, as I said, I'd been very close with Mommy, and whenever I came home from vacations, ever since college and ever since, Mommy and I would stay up late at night talking until 3, 4 in the morning, usually not going to bed until my dad stumbled out of their bedroom in his tighty-whitey jockeys and yelled at us, "Hey, hold on, it's time to sleep." And then we'd go to bed. So it was very noticeable and it was very painful. And I remember watching as my siblings all took photos in front of the Christmas tree, my brothers with their wives and my sister with her fiance. And my oldest brother, Jose, this was his third wife. She's the keeper. She's lovely. But it was very clear to me what the line was in my participation in the family, and it hurt. So Mommy and I were not alone until my last day in Puerto Rico, when she was helping me pack. And as we were packing, she was crying, and I brought it up. I said, "Mommy, I know that you and Tina talked." And she didn't say anything. I said, "I just need you to know that I am very happy. I have a very good life." And Mommy didn't say anything. And I left Puerto Rico that year, that trip, like angry at Mommy, angry at my sister for getting my hopes up, and confused, and I didn't talk to either of them for several months. And we finally did speak on the phone. I was driving to Minneapolis to work, and I confronted Mommy, and I said, you avoided being alone with me. And she denied it once. But as after that conversation, months went by, we didn't talk as often as we used to. But sometimes in silence, conversations can continue. And Mommy clearly had continued to think about this is the following Christmas, I did not go home to Puerto Rico, and usually when I'm in the States, first week of December, I get a gift from my mom, a packaged or a tree, a gift to put under our Christmas tree. And that year, I opened the box, and there were 2 gifts in it, one for me and one for John. Pajama bottoms. I thought, like, okay, so we went from don't ask, don't tell to you imagining us in bedclothes. Okay, like that's cool. And so Mommy and I sort of started patching back together a relationship. But in all this, even as she got more accustomed to speaking the fact that she had a gay son, she insisted that I could not tell my dad. And I think in many ways, Mommy's probably like she and my dad and I were probably caught in time for her, because growing up, my dad and I fought all the time. We fought a lot. Dad was a soldier. He was a career U.S. Army serviceman. He is a Vietnam vet. Served 2 tours of duty in Vietnam. In Vietnam, he was in the airborne division, which is to say that his job in Vietnam was to jump out of airplanes and helicopters on a parachute and descend into enemy territory while being shot at. What I'm trying to say is that the bar for masculinity in my house was really high, like Rambo high. And my dad and I, we just never got along and were always at each other's throats. But, time changes people. But I think in Mommy's head, I was still that little boy, and he was still that Vietnam vet with PTSD. So fast forward to a couple years, and there's a Labor Day weekend. I decided to surprise my parents with a trip home. And that trip home was different than before. Like it was back to how things were. Mommy and I stayed up all night talking. It was that was not something. I was closer to my dad, but my dad has always just sort of been a man of few words. He showed us he loved us by providing. But he didn't tell us that very often. And phone calls home. If my dad answered the phone, usually went like this. Javi, ¿cómo está? ¿Todo bien? ¿Te pongo tu mamá? Like, Javi, how you doing? Everything good? Let me put your mom on. But Mommy and I were very close. And so that, we stayed up late at night until Dad came out of the bedroom in his tighty-whitey jockeys and told us to go to bed. And on my last night there, Mommy and I stayed up late, and we had a conversation that felt like filling in all the silent spaces of those many years where we didn't speak the thing that could not be spoken. And I told Mommy that John and I had healthcare directives and wills. This was before our marriage was legal, and we just shared everything. And at one point, I asked her, I said, Mommy, do you still think that I can't tell my father? And Mommy was adamant. She said, no, you cannot. You cannot. He would not be able to handle it. And I said, well, what do you think would happen? He'd disown me? There's no money. But my dad, among his traits that I didn't identify, he's a very sort of, Latino kind of patriarch kind of a guy. But along with that, he's very much about family, right? He's always told us, you guys have to depend on each other. There's nothing else. You always have to have family. And so Mommy reacted to me asking that question. She said, no, your father would never do that. And I said, I don't think so either. I think he can handle it. But I will follow your lead if you think I can't tell him. And so the next day I'm coming back to Minnesota. And we have very tearful Latino family goodbyes in my house. Lots of tears. And I say goodbye and leave in my rental car. And just as I'm leaving our neighborhood, my phone rings, and it's Mommy, and she says to me, "Tu papá quiere hablar contigo. Your dad wants to speak to you." And my dad gets on the phone, and he says in English, "We love you. We love you very much." And I said, "I love you too." And then he hung up on me. I thought, well, that's weird. So I didn't know what that was about until a couple months later. My brother Kiko was in Minnesota for work, and we went out for a drink, and I told him that this had happened. I was like, this very weird interaction. And he said, "Oh, I know what happened. Mommy told me." So apparently after I had left, my mother was crying a lot, like more than usual. And my dad freaked out. And he said, "Carmine, is Javi okay? What's going on? Is there something wrong with Javi?" And my mom, who I should preface, does not normally sound like an actress in a telenovela. In this instance, she said, "Nos tenemos que quitar las máscaras." Yeah, we must take off our masks. To which my father, yeah, it was very dramatic. So it was my father, who fully understood what she was talking about. He replied, "You think I'm an idiot?" And that's how I came out to my dad, without words. And suddenly it was just like a switch was flipped in the family, not just with them, but with everyone. And certainly we were included in everything. And, you know, my siblings had known for many years, but it was like all out in the open. And now, and everyone in the family will acknowledge this with like that. John, my husband, is my dad's favorite in-law by far. It's embarrassing. He actually, just a few years ago, John said to me, "Oh, your dad said something, blah, blah, blah." And I'm like, "What do you mean my dad said?" He said, "Well, he called me." I'm like, "My father called you?" I texted my siblings. I'm like, "Our father called my husband." Everyone was freaked out. But yeah, and since that trip to Puerto Rico, now phone calls, if my father answers them, are just slightly longer. "Javi, ¿cómo estás? ¿Todo bien? ¿Cómo está John? Te pongo a tu mamá." Like, "Javi, how you doing? Everything good? How's John? Let me put your mom on." Thank you.
Thank you. That was beautiful. Continue to practice things I don't like doing and reading out loud to you all. Okay, Kabir. I didn't even read this ahead of time, so here we go. First run. Kabir is a queer Islami. Am I saying that right? Ismaili. I'm doing my best, and you will hear it better from Kabir himself. Muslim born and raised in Tanzania, who calls Twin Cities home. Through the years, he has performed his work at various local venues, including Walker Art Center, former Intermedia Arts, and Patrick's Cabaret. He is a poet, a writer, a visual artist. Professionally, Kabir has worked in higher education, 12K institutions for over 20 years, and currently works at Hiawatha Academy as a recruitment and admissions director. His work in education has focused on designing programs to facilitate access and retention of underrepresented students using holistic models and methods proven to increase student success and education rates. He serves as an adjunct faculty member in a holistic health studies department at St. Catherine's University, teaching a course on mindfulness-based meditation. He is a neutral court-appointed moderator and mediator. I'm practicing, thank you for your help, and does conflict coaching for individuals and organizations. Thank you. And I love seeing people getting up and taking care of yourself. Good job. So, you ready?
I was trying to think of coming out in Minneapolis, and there is so much. And I've tried to narrow somewhat of my story, but I'll read a bit and just tell you as it comes. So notes somehow make me feel secure. So Stories are encapsulated in what you remember. And like a kaleidoscope, it maps slightly a different color with time. This memory also lives in the body that experiences all the range of emotions: fear, anger, grief, but also joy, connection, and belonging. So details may have a certain color that we collectively least expect with time, but the feeling of those times is still in me. I focused on my coming out and queer history, but I hold within the story of a time marked by war, a country fueled with racism and anti-immigrant sentiment. Somehow when I came out, I expected the Pride Parade would at least reflect me. And in the sea of whiteness, I wanted to see my own skin. But more than that, I wanted support for my immigrant identity. I wanted an anti-war pride march. My name is Kabir Mohamed, he, him pronouns. I've lived in the Twin Cities since 1989, arriving from Tanzania. I was 19 years old, trying to find myself, having escaped a life of growing up in a household of domestic violence and a former colony. I always call myself, I'm a third world child. And I do that affectionately because growing up in Tanzania, one of the biggest lessons that I have learned globally, or at least from the West's perspective, we are viewed as not having a lot of material wealth. But for me, growing up in Tanzania meant to use my creativity for survival. So in 1989, that was a long time ago, it was a time when the Berlin Wall came down. And it was a really critical and phenomenal time as well. It was also on the verge of Nelson Mandela being released from prison. And I remember watching, waiting for him to be released. And that was a powerful, powerful moment for me. It's kind of etched in my brain, as some moments are. So within a year or two, I came out. And I was really lucky because I had an incredible school college counselor who was super supportive. And one of the things she did was recommend me to go see a therapist. I was having all sorts of feelings of isolation, both around my queerness and depression because of the trauma I had suffered through. And so she recommended a therapist at Family and Children's Services downtown. And I was even luckier because my therapist was a Black queer woman. And that was incredible. So I didn't have to deal with the racism that I was already experiencing. And she really helped me through. And given the Twin Cities and how small we are, we would end up at the same parties. And years later, after she had quit being a therapist, I learned that she would actually leave those parties as soon as I showed up, because she was so ethical around her boundaries. So when I came out, I joined the campus queer group, and at that time it was called the Gay, Lesbian, and they had just added the bisexual piece, student group. At that point, I also was friends with a white gay man, Andrew, and we decided to organize the first conference, and we called it Queers and Campus Life. And at that time, I think it was the first campus organizing conference around GLBT issues in the cities. And we invited all of the other student groups at different colleges. And so that was really groundbreaking. And so that was kind of sort of my coming out, and activism was really part and parcel of my life and my story. At that time, I was also really afraid to be deported because I was an international student, and most of you probably don't know the National Immigration Act of 1965 explicitly, even though they lifted bans on race and nationality, had explicitly a clause that that told the immigration services that GLBT folks could be deported. So that I carried with me all the time. And I remember that I had some problematic friends, and they knew about my identity, and it was really scary because I had to keep the peace with them in order for them not to report me. So there was always this cloud of fear around my immigration identity that continued to persist. Later on, during the same period of time when I was coming out, there was a change in the immigration law. But apparently, when I was trying to kind of do research around the Immigration Act, I realized that they had removed that clause, but the new thing that had come in was the US government prohibited HIV positive folks coming into the country. But I had no idea that the change had happened. So I continued with my sense of fear. So being the only South Asian queer person I knew of, a really good friend of mine actually put an ad in the paper. Now this is pre-internet, personal ads. We had the paper called Equal Times. And so she put an ad in the paper looking for South Asian queer friends. And so I answered the ad, and that was the first time I had met another South Asian queer person. And we actually ended up, I don't know why we didn't choose a coffee shop to get together, but we ended up at the Gay 90s, upstairs, where there was a bar called, I believe, West End. It was the only lesbian bar at that time. And so we met, and through that network, we sort of started connecting. We both didn't drive, so our time of trying to come downtown was we would take the number 5 bus all the way to the saloon and run when it was bar closing time because the buses stopped running at that time. So this friendship really helped me expand. And as we would go to the bars, we would meet people and introduce ourselves. And out of those introductions through time, we formed a group called Sankalpam, which was a South Asian queer organizing group. And that was the first time we got together. We had potlucks, and it was a mixed gender group. We marched in pride, and that was kind of sort of the true coming out for me, around really being able to see a sense of reflection. The amazing part that I feel that I always want to tell about that story is the people of color organizing that happened during that period of time, which was the 90s, there were all these groups that were forming. The other group was the Asian Pacific Lesbian and Bisexual Network. There was not T yet in there. And then there was Voces de Ambiente, which was the Latinx group. And then there was the Twin Cities Two-Spirit, Minnesota Two-Spirit Society. And men of color, let's see, there was BAD, which was called Black African American Dykes. So all of those groups existed concurrently. And one of the critical pieces we did in our organizing, we actually were always organizing together. We did fundraisers, and usually we had dances at the Playwright Center on Franklin Avenue. And those dances were similar to what Rebecca, in terms of how you are holding space, right? They were alcohol-free. We also had fragrance-free events. Really, we were always thinking critically about how to connect, be in community in a way that was accessible to all. And so for me, it was a really powerful time for BIPOC folks doing organizing, queer organizing. We fundraised, as during that same period of time, there were national conferences, national queer conferences happening. And so different groups wanted to go to those conferences, and so we helped send those. So that alliance building really was a powerful moment for me. So as I think about sort of where we are in this period of time, I am missing that organizing as how we are shaping identity and how it is changing. It is really making me think more about that we lack spaces where we can gather, whether it is homes, where people would bring, we had house parties during these periods of time, but these house parties were open, you know? If you were invited, you could bring a couple of friends, and if they were just coming out, those became sanctuaries for us. And those were the powerful pieces. That's how we built community. And that's how we cared for each other. As we struggled coming out to our families, as we struggled being undocumented, and this was pre-9/11, and so one of the things that happened to me was during that period of time is my dad cut off my tuition, and so I didn't have money to go to school. And so I ended up being undocumented for a period of time. So I cleaned houses for a living. I sort of learned to live in the shadows a little bit. And even though I would want to march, attend activist events, I would always be standing across the street. And so for me, those were the times where I felt if I didn't have the community of people, I don't think I would have survived. And so pre-9/11, going off status, you had to pay a fine in order to kind of sort of get your green card. So it's a long story around my family. That's how I ended up getting sponsored and ended up with my green card. But as I say this, there are lots of spaces that are also lost right now. So when you, Rebecca, when you read my bio, intermedia arts, that was where I was born as a writer and poet. That was the space where I really called home. There was a performance space called Vulva Riot, which ran for decades. And then that was a phenomenal place where there was once a month, people would gather there and we'd have performances. In the beginning, they would last about 3 or 4 hours, but with time, we got better and they lasted, 2 hours. But I was the house manager and Eleanor Savage was the curator. And so we worked together to build that space. And I remember the lines out the door to attend those spaces. So we've lost quite a bit. Patrick's Cabaret was another space where queer folks would go. And so the loss of those spaces, so I'm so glad you are providing that space to gather again. For all of us. So I have a lot to say, but I'm going to end it here. So thank you.
Thank you. I would love to just name that you're doing a project on, if you want to grab the mic and say a little bit about your project.
So the project is called Living Archives, and it's going to feature people from the 90s, 80s, late 80s, and 90s to really talk about art. So we want to do some circle where we'll be in conversation about what that meant coming out during that period of time and activism as well. So we'll post something through queer storytelling. So
yeah, if you have connections for someone who's a part of that or want to know more about it, you can sign up for our email list for Telling Queer History. You can talk to Kabir at the end. You can talk to me. We'll hook you up. And I do think there's importance of mourning what we've lost, like you named Patrick's Cabaret and Intermedia. And also, I went to a 50th birthday party last night. And most of the people I knew in that room, I knew because of 20% Theater Company, another queer gathering space that has built a lot of community for me and other folks. And I think about, yes, we need to mourn that loss, but we were talking about the next generation of people that were born from that and how we're raising that and all the things that, I never got to go to Vulva Riot, but we had a Telling Queer History about it. And that recording is available if anybody wants to listen. And all the juicy, good stories and community that was built there, that's not lost. The path that you paved for us, the next generation, and that was not lost, but I can absolutely understand the mourning in that as well. So I just want to say, your seeds are not gone. So thank you. Yeah. And there's going to be, they got a space. Queer Space Collective now has a building. They're opening on Hennepin Avenue above the Major in Queens. So there's fundraising for a community space. If you're into that, you can get in on a investor level. So it's going to be a community space, co-working space, event space. So lots of people have been working on getting us a community space for a while. This is one that has found a space. So yay. All right. Krista, are you ready? I'm going to read your bio. I know. It's so fun, isn't it? Okay, Krista is the author of Moby Dyke, an obsessive quest to track down the last remaining lesbian bars in America. Do you have copies for sale today?
I didn't think of that.
That's okay. You can buy them at local bookstores.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can. I think I saw it at Moon Palace this week, so go get it. The creator of the blog of Effing Dykes. She was the frequent contributor to the online magazine Rookie. Her writing has also appeared in New York Times, The Guardian, Elle, and Vice. And she lives in Minnesota. Okay. Are you ready to say some things, or do you need me to start a question?
Oh, no, go for it. Hi, everybody. This is what the book looks like. It came out last summer. It was the joy of my life.
Yes.
Yeah.
Why was it the joy of your life? What gave you joy from it?
Oh, my God. First of all, I'd always wanted to write a book my whole life. And I got to travel around to every last lesbian bar in the United States and check out and report on what I found. And I didn't have to do hard academic research, and I got to make so many jokes, and I had such a good time. And I got to meet hundreds of queer people and all the owners of the bars, and it was the most fun.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That sounds really fun.
Yeah.
How many bars was it?
It was 20 bars. At the time that I wrote this, there were only 20 lesbian bars left in the United States. I'm thrilled to report that there are so many more now.
Yay.
I think there's like close to 30 that are like official established bars. But at the time when I wrote this, it was 20 and things were rough.
Why lesbian bars?
Oh, because they mean everything to me. I'm 41. I came out, I think, in 2004-ish. And from the moment that I came out until always for the rest of my life, I have pretty much, most of my friends the vast majority of my friends are queer. Like, I try as much as I can. If I'm going out, it's a gay thing. Like, I want to go to a queer place. Like, whatever we're doing, like, is it gay? Can I go? Like, that's what I want to do. And I grew up in these bars. These lesbian bars were my entire social life when I was growing up and coming out and in the Twin Cities. I was around for the sad. It's gone that it's sad. It's sad that it's gone, but it was a wonderful year. I was around for the brief and wonderful year that was Pi, if anybody remembers Pi. And I spent an enormous amount of time in these spaces, and to see them one by one shutting their doors, one by one seeing these sad little announcements on Facebook, like a beloved lesbian bar was like, after 33 years in business, our wonderful customers were shutting our doors, and it would just kill me. The one that really got me, though, was the Lexington Club in San Francisco, where I spent just a huge amount of time. When the Lexington Club closed in 2015, that felt personal. The other bars, I was like, I guess, I mean, if they're not getting enough customers. But the Lexington Club was personal. And I spent the next couple of years just bitching about it to anyone that would listen. I'd be like, all our clubs are gone. We've got nowhere to go. And then I got mad enough in 2017 to pitch an article to the New York Times, and they took it. And that article was called "I Want My Lesbian Bars Back," and it was just me yelling. And from that, I got an agent, and from the agent, eventually, through a very long series of different ideas, in 2021, I got a book deal to write this. So yeah. Sure. Oh my God, there are so many reasons why the lesbian bars were closing. Okay, so I found out a lot when I would interview the owners. The number one reason that lesbian bars close is gentrification. Like, you can see it. Somebody has been in a location for 20 years, but they rent. They don't own the space. If you don't own the space, the landlord at any time can just be like, you know what would be cute here is some condos. And that's what we're going to do. So we're going to close your bar. And that is the number one reason. Another reason is sometimes the owners are like a couple and they break up. And then who gets the bar? Another one that I found was that I wasn't expecting is sometimes the owner will die and there's no succession plan. They haven't thought about, like, what if I suddenly die? And so nobody knows what to do with the bar. And then another one is things like dating apps and just like a less of an urgent need for those spaces, even though there's I think still a huge want for those spaces. So yeah, there's so many reasons.
That was a great question. Thank you. Also, we can have other folks ask questions. I'm curious if you can talk to a little bit about like lesbian bar versus other kinds of bar. What do you know about the history of lesbian bars? Why does lesbian bar matter?
Lesbian bar matters because historically, lesbian bars have taken in the queer umbrella that could not get into like gay men's bars. Lesbian bars have always been much more welcoming to people who want to come into those bars. That's not to say that lesbian bars aren't like, you know, all these wonderful, perfect spaces where everyone is welcome all the time and always has been. Definitely not. But lesbian bars as a whole have always taken in people who couldn't get into like gay men's bars. And lesbian bars have been very vital in the community. They consistently do community service projects. They are constantly sponsoring things like softball teams. Even if they absolutely can't afford it, they're going to do it. Lesbian bars have this incredible feeling to them when you go as someone who maybe has never been to one before, and you go in and you just, at least I personally, felt like I could breathe for the first time, and also couldn't believe the stuff that I was seeing. Yeah? Do you have a question? This is like a multi-tiered question, and one part of it is like what you said at the end. Time and time again, I would talk to lesbian bar owners, and they would be very frustrated and like would be like, first of all, you cannot write down what I'm about to say. And then I'd be like, okay, I'm ready. And they would be like throwing up their hands saying, we are supposed to be inclusive to everybody, but people come in here and they say, how come there's so many dudes here? And they're pissed and they leave. Or how come there's so many of whatever I don't want to see, like any kind of person? And then they're like throwing their hands up thinking, how am I supposed to be inclusive but also exclusive? And like that is another contributing factor to why the bars close. I did run into a few spaces, and I will name one, which was a bar of their own, where I saw what you're describing happening. It was an interesting place. And only the bartenders would talk to me about it. I never got to talk to the owner, but it was clear that the gentrification in this DC neighborhood had turned the bar into kind of what it was, which is the bar in the basement was for queer people, and like there were like people of color down there. We could see that. And upstairs was very fancy, and that was the gay men's bar, and things were different. And so, yeah, we definitely ran into that. Does that answer your question? Okay. Okay. I mean, I can read from some of the book. If does anybody have any questions? Yes, and also no. The same thing. There are fewer gay men's bars than there were, but not like lesbian bars. Like in 1987, there were like 206 lesbian bars. When I did the book, there were 20. And there are still hundreds and hundreds of gay men's bars, and they are thriving. Not all of them, but yeah. So, I wanted to. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Yes. The question was, did I ever think about doing lesbian bars in other countries? And yeah, that would be so fun. A long time ago, I taught English in Taiwan for like a year, and the lesbian bar scene there was unhinged. It was so good. It would be so fun to do other countries, and I know it was just focused like narrowly on the U.S. But should there ever come a time, yeah. Okay, nope, I never did that. It was mostly focused on talking to people inside the bars. I didn't really notice any particular reasons why bars were closing in different regions, more than, because the gentrification was happening everywhere. I did notice that like bars in, say, the Midwest had huge square footage, and that didn't seem to be a problem because of cost. Versus bars like Cubbyhole in New York, where maybe 60 people can get inside, and the rent is astronomical. But because of the amount of turnover that they have, they were still able to afford it. I'm not sure I'm answering your question correctly.
No, I think you're getting it.
Okay.
Because like you said, you did interact with the outside.
Right, yeah. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay.
Okay, we'll do another question, and then we're getting close to the end of our time together. How sad. But let's have another one.
That definitely did happen. I did notice in the bars in the South, several bars had completely like wooden panels over their windows. There was no way to see inside the bars, and when I asked about it, the owners told me that like that's because here it's an oasis, and outside is Trump flags, and what goes on in here never gets talked about outside. I didn't notice anything like that in places like bigger cities, especially on the East Coast. I never saw anything like that. The people inside the bars looked incredibly similar to the people who were outside the bars. But as you went south, I was noticing that a lot. And people who came into the bars were immediately noticed. Like when I went to the bars in the South, heads turned. But it wasn't just for me, it was for everyone. Everyone saw you immediately, noted that you were there, and like resumed with their business. But that never happened on the East Coast, on the West Coast, in other bars in the Midwest. It was only in the South. It was as if everyone was quietly seeing you and then like moving along.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's like so much more we could get into, and I'll also name there's some fun videos. Fertile Ashes is a film. Have you seen it?
No.
No. Pam Colby, who was one of our storytellers at this exhibit last year, made a documentary reenactment film. Sweet Pea is in it.
Oh, really?
I know, one of your dear friends.
Yeah.
Fertile Ashes. It's about a lesbian bar that was in the Twin Cities, and it was like literally a basement, and it was it ended because it was on fire, and to be determined still if it was arson or accident. But anyway, maybe we'll have a house party at my house and watch it together if
Yeah.
Pam lets me. Yeah, sign up for that email list if you want that invite. Just saying. I'm gonna just look at my time because, okay, I know that I would love to read some of your book, but I want to give an opportunity for folks to meet each other, if that's okay with you. We're gonna do something because I've been up here reading out loud, which I really hate doing, and like getting to hear these beautiful stories. Everyone's been so vulnerable, such gorgeous storytelling. Thank you so much. I'm gonna ask you all to do something that you might feel a little uncomfortable with. It's called getting to know someone. Okay, so this is something that Telling Queer History does. It's all consent-based, so if that just made you want to jump out of your body, you can jump out of the room. It's consent-based. But the idea is we're going to say our names, our pronouns, That's like, for me, they, them. You can decide what yours are. And I'm going to say, what is something that brought you to this room today? So you're going to say that to somebody. Here's the exciting part. Try to talk to somebody that you didn't come here with or you didn't know, okay? We're going to try and build community. People, you can even talk to these wonderful folks up here. They want to make friends too. This is how we build community. So if you're consenting to it, we're going to move around the space and meet somebody new. And if you really feel excited, you can then introduce that new person to another couple. So like we just met, and then we're going to go meet another person. And I'm going to say, this is my new friend, Jennifer. And she came because, you know, whatever. And we're going to find out, Jennifer. So that's how we're going to do it. You're going to meet 2, 3 people today. Ready? All right. Okay, and then sign up for the email on the way out. And you can take a flyer and invite your friends to Telling Queer History if you like this. If you didn't like this, don't tell anybody about it. Okay? Thank you for being here. Thank you.